They called Earth a death world, a savage place unworthy of attention. But when humanity was pushed too far, the galaxy learned a lesson it would never forget. This is not just a story of war. It's the story of survival sharpened into strategy, of broken tools turned into weapons, and of a people who rose from ash not to conquer, but to be heard. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and show some love with a thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's move toward this wonderful story that changed the stars forever. Envoy Ralik of the Sindari Union stood at the edge of the council chamber, studying the newest reports with a quiet frown. His crystal blue skin reflected the pale light from the massive dome overhead. Around him, other delegates from across the galaxy chatted with ease, sipping from ornate cups and laughing at old stories. But Ralik wasn't in the mood for laughter. He had just finished reading a security file marked with an orange-level alert, an unusual level of urgency for something involving such a primitive world. The planet in question? Earth, a Class 10 death world located in a forgotten arm of the Orion sector. For centuries, most council members had viewed it as little more than a strange, wild place, a planet where storms could swallow cities, animals, could kill in seconds, and the native species, humans, were considered unruly and chaotic. Curious, perhaps. Dangerous? Not really. Their technology was crude, their ships slow, their weapons outdated by at least 1,000 years. And yet here was an alert. A conflict had begun. It started on Thalos Ridge, a mineral-rich moon orbiting a star called Cora 6. Humans had established a mining colony there, unaware that the Sindari had once claimed the system long ago. When Sindari patrols arrived to evict the settlers, they expected a simple conversation, or perhaps a brief protest easily dismissed. They had energy weapons, pulse armor, and the backing of an empire. The humans had hand tools, recycled suits, and a flag made from stitched-together canvas. But instead of leaving, the humans stayed. The commander of the human camp was a man named Gren. Broad-shouldered, with a grizzled beard and worn eyes, he stood in the red dust of Thalos Ridge like someone who had never once considered the idea of defeat. When the Sindari commander issued his demands, Gren simply looked up at the gunships and smiled. "Then you'll have to make us," he said. No one expected what happened next. The Sindari attacked, confident in their superiority. But the humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't form neat battle lines or retreat to fortified bases. Instead, they vanished into the rock fields, using mining tunnels and terrain as weapons. They turned drilling machines into battering rams. They threw magnetic charges onto ship hulls. And when the Sindari soldiers entered the tunnels, they found the humans waiting. Not with advanced tech, but with brutal determination. In just under an hour, the Sindari patrol was forced to retreat. One ship destroyed, 2 damaged, multiple soldiers injured, and not from alien tech, but from humans using tools meant to shape stone and harvest ore. The council dismissed it. At first, a fluke, they said, a strange accident, but Ralik wasn't so sure. Back on Thalos Ridge, Gren and his team didn't celebrate. They knew what would come next. They weren't warriors by choice. They were miners, engineers, settlers. But they had grown up on Earth. They had learned to survive earthquakes, wildfires, floods, and worse. Danger wasn't a surprise to them. It was a constant companion. And when faced with an enemy that expected them to fold, they didn't flinch. They adapted. News spread slowly, but the whispers grew. Reports of human resistance, in fringe zones, encounters where alien soldiers found themselves overwhelmed by sheer unpredictability, where humans fought in silence, bled without complaint, and used everything around them as a weapon. One pirate captain described watching a human repair their own spacesuit mid-battle while dragging an injured ally to safety. Another spoke of a human who continued firing despite having lost an arm. Back in the council, Ralik requested a full intelligence review. Some delegates laughed. "They're Deathworlders," one said with a shrug. "They're tough, that's all." But Ralik wasn't laughing. He remembered a lesson from his youth. Sometimes the smallest spark, left unnoticed, can grow into a fire no one can contain. In a quiet meeting room, he watched surveillance footage from the Thalos Ridge battle. The resolution was low, the sound distorted, but one image stood out. It was Commander Gren standing on a ridge, staring up at the stars. Dust swirled around him, and the wreckage of a Sindari gunship lay in the distance. He didn't speak. Didn't pose. He just stood there solid as stone. And Rallick understood. These were not primitives. They were something else entirely, something the Council had never prepared for. A people shaped by hardship, hardened by chaos, and now awakened. He closed the report and leaned back in his chair. The rest of the galaxy still thought of humans as backward, fragile, undisciplined. But Rallick had seen enough. He knew the truth. The spark had already caught, and it was only a matter of time before it lit the stars on fire. Captain Leora Bain stood at the bridge of the Halcyon dusk, her eyes fixed on the tactical display glowing in soft orange light. Around her, the crew moved with quiet urgency, each step rehearsed, every motion sharp. Their ship wasn't built for elegance. It was a rough combination of salvaged parts, old human freighters, and bits of captured alien tech. But it worked. And out here, at the edge of mapped space, that was what mattered. The war had changed. No longer a dispute over one colony or one ridge. Now it was a slow-burning fire spreading across sectors. The Council's official stance remained firm. Humanity was out of line, dangerous, unstable. But their fear had begun to show. Quietly, they reinforced borders, rerouted trade lanes, and issued new instructions to planetary outposts. They were bracing for something worse. And they were right to. The humans didn't launch massive invasions. They didn't declare territories or demand resources. Instead, they attacked shadows, infrastructure, communication satellites, energy hubs, all struck with precision, then abandoned before help could arrive. Captain Bain had led 5 such missions already. Tonight would be the 6th. Their target was a fuel depot orbiting the planet Tresca, vital to the Sindari fleet supply chain. No civilians, no unnecessary damage, but enough to send a message. As the Halcyon dusk dropped from stealth mode and coasted into position, Bain gave a single nod. The crew acted instantly. On the surface, strategist Menric Val sat in a darkened control center watching his monitors flicker. The base had just lost contact with its orbital satellite array. At first he thought it was a glitch. But then the lights dimmed, the system's backup kicked in, and that's when the alarm started. "They've breached Docking Bay 3, a technician called out. Unknown signatures, no Sindari codes. Possibly human. Val's breath caught. Not again, he thought. He had studied the new human tactics for weeks, watched the reports pour in from other outposts. They were always different, always unexpected. One base lost power due to viruses buried in captured maintenance drones. Another had been infiltrated through underground vents no one had even thought to seal. The humans didn't play by any known rules. They played to win. Inside the depot, human commandos moved like ghosts. Their suits were patched, their weapons a mix of standard rifles and improvised tech. But they were fast, and they worked in complete silence. They didn't leave anything behind, no mess, no traces. They planted charges with exact timing, mapped escape routes, and disappeared just before security forces arrived. Captain Bain waited aboard the ship, listening to each update with calm focus. At exactly the 3-minute mark, her comm officer gave the signal. "All teams back. No casualties." "Charges armed?" Bain asked. "Yes, Captain. Ready." "Then let's go." As the Halcyon dusk pulled away, small flashes lit the sky behind them. Not massive explosions, just enough to disable systems, leave repair crews confused, delay progress. That was the goal. Keep them off balance. Keep them guessing. Val stood on the platform, watching the depot smoke gently in the distance. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't even heavily damaged. But it was the 6th hit in 4 weeks. 6 different methods, 6 different styles, no clear pattern. Just one truth. Humans were everywhere, and they didn't need ships to win. Reports from other systems showed the same. On the city world of Venari, humans had lived undetected for months. They worked jobs, rented homes, even befriended locals. Until one night they all disappeared. The next morning, every planetary defense grid went offline for 3 hours. No one ever found out how. Val turned to his assistant, a young analyst named Lauren. "They don't think like us," he said. "They don't fight like us. We train for controlled environments, measured action, predictable variables. They train in chaos." Lauren hesitated. "Then how do we stop them?" Val didn't answer, because deep down he wasn't sure they could. Back aboard the Halcyon Dusk, Captain Bain sat quietly in her quarters, sipping from a metal cup and staring at a simple map on her wall. It wasn't labeled with star systems or political boundaries, just markers, each one a place they had struck, each one a reminder that they were still standing. She didn't consider herself a hero. Heroes wore clean uniforms and gave speeches. She was just someone who had grown up watching her world teach survival the hard way. She had watched storms destroy cities, seen floods take villages, and felt hunger that made bones ache. But Earth had taught her something most galactic citizens had forgotten. Pain doesn't break you. It builds you. The crew around her wasn't made of warriors or elites. They were engineers, medics, teachers, and former miners. People who had learned to fix things, carry weight, and keep moving. And now, out here among stars once ruled by others, they were the spark in the dark. Their enemies had numbers. They had technology. But the humans had will. And in war, will was a weapon too. The shadows would not last forever, but for now, they belonged to those who knew how to use them. Engineer Haru Felden sat on the cracked hull of an old cargo ship, staring up at the sky where the stars flickered faintly through the smoke of another distant battle. He rubbed a smudge of grease from his cheek with the back of his glove and tightened the tool in his hand. Around him the air buzzed with motion, crews welding, dragging equipment, rewiring panels. It wasn't the scene of a polished military base, but a scrapyard transformed into a battlefield lab. This was how humans prepared for war, not with polished fleets or perfect blueprints, but with broken parts, relentless hands, and stubborn hearts. The fleet was almost ready. Admiral Lena Koss walked past rows of half-built ships and hybrid fighters, patched with every kind of metal and alien alloy. Her coat flapped in the wind, stained with dust and fuel. She wasn't here to look impressive. She was here because she believed in what they were doing, and she knew time was running out. The Council's forces were regrouping, and retaliation was inevitable. But Koss had a plan. Not just to strike back, but to strike deep, to show the galaxy something it had forgotten, that humans weren't just survivors, they were innovators. Though, Council had long banned biological warfare, believing themselves above such primitive tactics, but they had never faced enemies who viewed survival as a daily challenge, not a privilege. When the Sindari first attacked Thalos Ridge, they left behind more than damage. They left behind samples, tissue, fluids, and biological data. Haru had recovered them all. Not for revenge, for understanding. What they discovered terrified even Koss. Earth's microbes, harmless to humans, reacted violently when introduced to alien biology. At first they tested in isolated labs, cautious, scientific. But as more reports of Council attacks came in, the decision changed. Not out of hatred, but necessity. The program became known as Silent Mirror. It wasn't designed to kill, it was designed to weaken, to disable, to disrupt. Fast-spreading but controlled. Adaptable but targeted. It was war evolved by those who had been underestimated too long. The first release was subtle, on a supply route passing through the Loran belt. Days later, Council ships reported sudden malfunctions in neural control systems. Crews experienced symptoms their medics couldn't explain. Fatigue, disorientation, and allergic responses to their own food systems. No fatalities. But their ships turned back. Others soon followed. Fleets once confident in their superiority found themselves stranded not by weapons but by illness they couldn't cure. Koss sent a message to the Council after the third confirmed disruption. It was short. "We warned you. We offered peace. You chose pride. Back on the edge of known space, Haru watched his latest drone come to life, powered by recycled solar cells and an alien guidance chip. It lifted into the air, hovered briefly, and zipped off with a quiet whine. Another tool in a war that no longer followed any rulebook. But not all humans agreed with Kasa's tactics. Some believed they were going too far, becoming the very thing they once fought against. Others saw it differently. This was not a war of destruction. It was a fight for balance, for recognition, for the right to not be stepped on by empires who thought kindness was weakness. The council, meanwhile, was in chaos. Leaders argued. Alliances cracked, trust faded. Their advanced systems couldn't keep up with human unpredictability. Whole sectors began to isolate themselves out of fear. Civilian planets demanded answers their leaders couldn't give. How had a single species once considered backward brought them to the edge of collapse? Admiral Kos didn't celebrate. She knew this wasn't victory. Not yet. Too many lives had already been lost. And she still remembered the early days, when Earth was ignored, its warnings laughed at, its people called brutes. Now, those same people flew ships that could dive through asteroid fields blindfolded and built weapons that used gravity like rope. On the ground, Haru finished repairs on the last escape pod. It wasn't much, but it might save a life. That was always the goal. He wasn't a soldier, he didn't want war, but he'd seen too many friends fall, too many innocents left behind. He picked up his tools and moved to the next wreck without a word. That night, under a broken sky where battles left trails of fire, Kos stood on the command deck of the Emberline, her flagship. She watched the stars flicker above, then dim, then burn again. The war wasn't won, but the old rules no longer applied. The council still called them Deathworlders. They still used words like dangerous and unstable, but they had stopped using the word primitive. That was gone now, burned away by reality. Beneath those broken stars, the galaxy began to understand. Humanity didn't rise in spite of its world. It rose because of it. And now, the stars would have to learn to live with the fire they had tried to snuff out. General Corandrael stood on the command deck of the Soul's Echo, staring out at the vast black sea of space. Ahead of him floated Nova Port, the heart of the Galactic Council, the last symbol of the old order. Its towers reached like frozen fingers into the dark, surrounded by rings of defense platforms and automated turrets. It had never been touched by war, until now. Around the general, the largest human fleet ever gathered waited in silence. Ships built from scrap, powered by stolen tech and held together with the will of a species that had been pushed too far. There was no celebration, no music, no cheering. Just steady breaths, quiet nods, and the heavy knowledge that what they were about to do would change the galaxy forever. Inside the central chamber of Nova Port, Speaker Juno Ray stood before the council. She had once been a respected diplomat, long retired after her work on peaceful trade routes between human and alien worlds. But now, she had returned, not to beg, but to speak one final truth. Her voice, quiet yet firm, echoed through the dome. She didn't read from notes. She didn't raise her voice. She simply told the story of how it all began, of how a colony had been asked to leave land it didn't know was claimed, of how the first shot was fired not by humans, but by those who believed themselves above consequence. She reminded them of every chance they'd been given to choose peace, and of the silence that always followed. The fleet waited. General Drail gave no orders. He didn't need to. His pilots were ready. His engineers had run every system twice. There would be no retreat, but also no needless destruction. They had come not to burn Nova Port, but to force a decision. Inside her quiet command post, Juno, Ray sent a signal. A single message. We offer one last choice. Across the galaxy, systems held their breath. Civilian broadcasts cut to emergency channels. News networks translated human demands into every known language. The message was clear. If the Council surrendered peacefully, the fleet would stand down. But if they resisted, the humans would not hold back. There would be no second warning. For long minutes, Novaport remained silent. Then, slowly, its shields dropped. Its defense, turrets powered down. Council members filed into the chamber, eyes tired, voices low. Speaker Ray stepped forward and offered the terms: recognition of humanity as an equal member of the Galactic Assembly, a permanent ban on aggressive enforcement near human territories, and the creation of a new law, the Pact of Protected Oaths. Any species, no matter how new or unknown, would be given the right to exist without fear of forced eviction or attack. At first, some council members protested. They spoke of order, of tradition, of the need to control chaos. But others remembered. They remembered what they had seen. Human ships diving into asteroid fields without hesitation. Human soldiers holding broken ground with bare hands and sharper minds. Human medics who saved enemy lives even as their own burned. And they remembered the ash, what was left behind when pride rose too high. The vote passed, not by force, but by truth. General Drayle watched as Novaport opened its ports. Human ships didn't land with weapons drawn. They came with repair crews, engineers, translators, and food supplies. They came not as conquerors, but as a reminder that power did not always mean violence. Sometimes it meant patience, and sometimes it meant simply surviving long enough to be heard. On the surface of a small scorched moon nearby, Juno Ray walked to the top of a ridge carrying a small box. Behind her were a few diplomats, a few children, and a few soldiers who had seen too much. She opened the box and pulled out a seed, small, gray, and unremarkable. It had come from Earth, saved from a forest that no longer stood. With care, she planted it in the ash-covered soil and poured a single cup of water over it. "This is for memory," she said, "so we don't forget what silence cost us." The camera drones filmed it. The image traveled across planets, across languages, across beliefs. A seed in the ash. An oath made not with weapons, but with roots. Back aboard the Soul's Echo, General Drayle sat in his private quarters, hands clasped in front of him. He didn't feel victorious, he felt tired, but he knew something had changed, not just for humans, but for the galaxy. They would no longer be ignored. They would no longer be seen as lesser. They had carved a place not through domination but through unwavering resolve. The Council would rebuild. New systems would rise. The stars would shine again. But now every world, from frozen moons to golden capitals, would remember the day the humans came not to destroy, but to ask a question. Will you hear us before it's too late? That question would echo in halls and hearts for generations. And the tree growing quietly on a moon of ash would answer it forever.